The ink on the document was black, sharp, and final. I remember staring at it, the paper resting on the polished mahogany surface of the dining table in the Montgomery estate. It felt less like a legal agreement and more like a collar. "It's standard procedure, Bethany," Patricia said. She didn't look at me. She was busy swirling her Chardonnay, inspecting the legs of the wine against the crystal glass. "We have a legacy to protect. The Montgomery name carries weight. Assets. Responsibilities. We can't just let anyone dilute that." I sat there, my hands folded in my lap to hide the fact that they were shaking. Beside me, David looked at his shoes. He was 26 then, but in that massive dining room, under the gaze of his mother and father, he looked like a child waiting for permission to speak. "I understand, Patricia," I said, my voice quiet. "I love David. I'm not after your money." Richard, my father-in-law, chuckled. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Everyone says that, dear. Until the divorce papers are filed. Then suddenly, everyone feels entitled to the lifestyle they grew up watching on TV." The insult was precise. They knew I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Ohio. My father was a mechanic, my mother was a school teacher. We had love, we had dinner together every night, but we didn't have assets. We didn't have a legacy. To the Montgomerys, that made me a threat. A parasite waiting to attach itself to their golden host. Patricia slid the document across the table. It hissed against the wood. "Read Clause 4 specifically," she commanded. I looked down. The legal jargon was dense, but the meaning was clear. Total separation of assets. In the event of a divorce, I would leave with exactly what I came in with, nothing. No alimony. No claim to the house. No claim to any future earnings of my husband. And then, the kicker, a clause that stated I would be responsible for reimbursing the family for social integration costs incurred during the marriage. Basically, if David dumped me, I would owe them money for the privilege of having been his wife. This says I have to pay you back for dates?" I asked, looking up. "Relationships are an investment, Bethany." Brad, David's younger brother, chimed in from the other end of the table. He was picking at a hangnail, looking bored. "If the investment fails, we need to recoup our losses." Business 101. Brad was 30 years old, unemployed, and currently driving a Range Rover his parents paid for. He had never worked a day in his life, yet he was lecturing me on business. I looked at David. "David? Do you agree with this?" David finally looked up. His eyes were pleading. "Beth, please. It's just paper. It makes Mom feel secure. We're never getting divorced anyway, right? So it doesn't matter. Just sign it so we can plan the wedding. Please." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I looked at the three of them, Patricia with her smug superiority, Richard with his arrogance, and Brad with his entitlement. They thought I was desperate. They thought I was trapping David. The irony was suffocating. I had just graduated top of my class with a dual degree in computer science and business. I had been scouted by 3 major tech firms. I had a brain that never stopped working. They saw a poor girl. They didn't see the hurricane that was brewing inside me. I picked up the pen. "Fine," I said. "I'll sign." "Smart girl," Patricia smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile a shark gives a seal before the bite. I signed my name. Bethany A. Miller. With that signature, I legally severed my financial future from the Montgomery family. I built a wall between my destiny and theirs. At the time, I felt humiliated. I felt small. I felt like I was selling my soul to buy peace for the men I loved. I didn't know it then, but that signature was the best financial decision of my life. I didn't know that by forcing me to sign that predatory document, Patricia had actually handed me the keys to my own freedom. I capped the pen and pushed the paper back. Done, I said. Are we family now? Patricia picked up the document, blowing on the ink as if to dry it faster. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, dear. You're David's wife. Being a Montgomery, that's something you're born into. I swallowed the lump in my throat. The room felt cold, despite the fireplace roaring in the corner. I promised myself right then and there, I would never, ever ask these people for a penny. I would build my own empire, brick by brick, on the other side of that legal wall they just erected. And when I did, they wouldn't be able to touch a single dime of it. The wedding was the first real manifestation of the contract I had signed. Since the prenup established that we were financially separate entities, Patricia decided that the Montgomery family shouldn't be burdened with the cost of a wedding for a bride they didn't respect. They paid for exactly 10 guests on their side. They refused to contribute to the venue, the flowers, or the food. My parents, bless their hearts, dipped into their retirement savings to give me a small, beautiful ceremony in a local botanical garden. It was intimate. It was real. But the Montgomerys couldn't just attend, they had to make a statement. Patricia wore white. An ivory, floor-length gown that looked suspiciously like a wedding dress. She breezed into the garden, criticizing the humidity, and sat in the front row with a grimace. But the real insult was Brad. Hey, check out the threads, Brad announced, strutting into the reception area. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian tuxedo. Nice suit, Brad, David said, trying to keep the peace. You look sharp. Yeah, Mom got it for me for the event, Brad laughed, grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing tray. Cost about $4,000. Gotta represent the family brand, right? Can't have us looking like, well, like this. He gestured vaguely at my handcrafted centerpieces. $4,000. My entire wedding budget was $5,000. Patricia had spent nearly the same amount on a suit her unemployed son would vomit on later that night, as she had refused to contribute to her eldest son's wedding. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was my dad. His hands were rough with calluses and grease stains that never quite washed out. Let it go, Bethy, he whispered. Rich in money doesn't mean rich in class. I held onto those words. I held onto them tight. The first 2 years of marriage were a grind. David worked in insurance, a job his father got him, which paid decently but sucked the soul out of him. I, on the other hand, took a risk. I didn't take the corporate offers. I had an idea for an educational app, something that used AI to help children with learning disabilities. I worked out of our garage. It wasn't the romantic startup in a garage story you hear in Silicon Valley. It was freezing in the winter and sweltering in the summer. I coded for 18 hours a day. The Montgomerys visited once. So you're just playing on the computer all day? Patricia asked, stepping gingerly over a box of cables as if it were radioactive waste. I'm building a company, Patricia, I said, not looking away from my monitor. It looks like unemployment to me, Richard muttered. David, are you sure you can support this hobby? You know, in the real world, wives usually contribute to the household. She is working hard, Dad, David said, though his voice lacked conviction. He was tired. He was paying the bills while I built the prototype. I knew he felt the pressure. Well, just remember, Patricia said, touching her pearls. If you two go under because she refuses to get a real job, don't come knocking on our door. We made our position clear with the agreement. The agreement. The prenup. It was their shield and their sword. They used it to remind me that I was on probation. That night, after they left, I didn't cry. Crying takes energy. Instead, I opened a new folder on my encrypted hard drive. I named it The Receipts. I scanned a copy of the prenup. I wrote down the date and the exact words Richard had said. I logged the cost of the wine they drank from our stash without asking. I logged the insults. It was a small, petty thing at first. A way to vent. But as my fingers flew across the keyboard, documenting their cruelty, I realized I was doing something else. I was building a database. I was an architect of information. If they wanted to treat our relationship like a business transaction, I would keep the books. Brad called David a week later. "Hey bro, I need $500. Investment opportunity." "Can't tell Mom." David looked at me. We were eating instant noodles. We had $60 in the checking account until Friday. "We don't have it, Brad," David said. "Come on, man. Your wife is just sitting at home. Tell her to sell some of her junk or something. Family helps family." David hung up. He didn't send the money. But the guilt on his face, the conditioning Patricia had instilled in him that he was responsible for his fragile younger brother, was eating him alive. I reached across the table and took David's hand. "Give me 6 months," I said. "Just 6 months. I promise you, everything changes." He nodded, but I could see the doubt. He loved me, but he didn't believe in me. Not the way I believed in myself. And the Montgomerys? They believed I was an anchor dragging their son down. They had no idea I was the one building the boat. Fast forward 5 years. The thing about exponential growth is that it happens slowly, and then all at once. My app, MindBridge, caught the attention of a major venture capital firm in San Francisco. Then a government contract. Then an acquisition offer I refused, choosing to go public instead. By the time I was 33, my net worth had crossed the 8-figure mark. I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't buy a private jet. I bought a beautiful, modern home in the hills, fully paid for in cash under an LLC name, so the public record wouldn't immediately scream, Bethany Miller. I bought David a vintage Porsche he had always dreamed of. But mostly, I reinvested. And I kept my finances strictly separate, just as the prenup required. The dynamic with the Montgomerys began to shift, but not in the way you'd expect. They didn't apologize. They didn't acknowledge my success. They simply absorbed it. They started inviting themselves over to our new house more often. "This view is adequate," Patricia said one evening, standing on our balcony overlooking the city lights. She was wearing a coat that looked worn at the seams. I had noticed lately that Richard wasn't driving the newest Mercedes anymore. He was driving a model 4 years old. Small details. "It's beautiful, Mom," David said. He stood taller now. He had quit his insurance job and was running the operations side of my foundation. He looked healthier, happier. "It's a bit flashy, don't you think?" Richard grunted, pouring himself a glass of my $500 scotch without asking. "New money always screams. Old money whispers." "Actually, Richard," I said, cutting a piece of steak. "It whispers because it's afraid of the tax audit. I pay my taxes so I can scream as loud as I want." The table went silent. Richard's face turned a shade of beet red. "Disrespectful," Patricia hissed. "Is this what money does to you? Makes you forget your place?" "My place is at the head of this table," I said calmly. "In the house I bought. Drinking the wine I paid for." You would think they would leave. They didn't. They finished the steak. They finished the bottle of scotch. Because, as I was beginning to suspect, they couldn't afford to eat like this anywhere else. The cracks in the Montgomery empire were starting to show, if you knew where to look. And thanks to my receipts folder, I was looking everywhere. I noticed Brad was posting less on Instagram. No more trips to Dubai. No more VIP tables in Vegas. Instead, he was consulting for his father's real estate firm. Then came the subtle requests. "David," Patricia said over dessert. "Your father and I were thinking. The estate is so big for just the two of us. Maybe we should downsize. Or perhaps we could consolidate assets. For tax purposes, of course." Consolidate? I asked, sharpening my gaze. Family trusts, Richard said quickly. Pooling resources. It protects everyone. But we have the prenup, I reminded them, my voice sweet as honey. Total separation. Remember? Clause 4. To protect the Montgomery legacy. Patricia's hand twitched. Well, agreements can be amended. Times change. We should think about the future. Brad is looking to start a venture, and if we pool our capital. No, I said. Excuse me. No amendment. The prenup stays. It makes me feel secure. I threw her words back at her from 7 years ago. Patricia stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. You are a selfish woman, Bethany. We welcomed you into this family. You made me sign a contract that treated me like a prostitute you were afraid would steal the silverware. I didn't shout. My voice was ice cold. And now that the silverware is mine, you want to change the rules. No. They left in a huff. David stayed seated, swirling his water. They're struggling, aren't they? He asked quietly. I think so, I said. Brad called me yesterday, David admitted. He owes some people money. Bad people. He wanted $20,000. Did you give it to him? I told him to ask Dad. And? He said Dad is tapped out. I leaned back in my chair. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. The entitlement wasn't just arrogance anymore, it was desperation. They weren't just mean, they were drowning. And like drowning people, they would try to climb on top of anyone to stay afloat. I was the only life raft in sight. And I had just punctured their hull. The turning point, the moment I stopped being a defensive player and became an offensive striker, happened on a rainy Tuesday in November. It was my son Leo's 5th birthday. Leo is my world. He has David's eyes and my curiosity. For weeks, he had been talking about Grandpa and Grandma coming to his party. He wanted to show Grandpa his Lego castle. I had organized a party at a local indoor adventure park. I invited the Montgomerys 2 months in advance. I sent reminders. At 2 p.m., the party started. At 2:30 p.m., Leo was watching the door. At 3 p.m., all the other kids were eating cake. Leo was sitting by the window, his little party hat slightly askew, watching the rain streak against the glass. Are they coming, Mommy? He asked. My heart broke into 1,000 jagged pieces. I'm sure they're just stuck in traffic, baby. I stepped into the hallway and called Patricia. Straight to voicemail. I called Richard. Voicemail. I called Brad. Brad picked up. I could hear chaotic noise in the background. Sirens. Shouting. Brad, where are you guys? Leo is waiting, I said, trying to keep the fury out of my voice. Yeah, look, we can't make it, Brad said. He sounded frantic, breathless. Mom and Dad are busy. Busy? It's their grandson's birthday. You RSVP'd, yes. Shut up, Bethany. Not everything is about you and your brat. Brad screamed. The mask was fully off. We're at the precinct, okay. I got into a situation. A fender bender. But the guy is making a big deal out of it. You're arrested. I need bail, Brad demanded. Mom and Dad don't have the liquidity right now. The accounts are frozen for some audit thing. I need you to wire 10 grand. Now. I stood there in the hallway of the adventure park, the sound of happy children screaming in the distance contrasting with the sordid reality on the phone. They missed Leo's birthday because Brad got arrested, again, and they were there coddling him. And now, they wanted my money to fix it. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was scarier than any scream. You missed Leo's party. You made my son cry. And your solution is to demand $10,000? It's a loan. God, you're so stingy. You have millions. Just send the wire, or Mom is going to have a heart attack from the stress. Do you want that on your conscience? The entitlement. The weaponized guilt. The absolute erasure of my son's existence in favor of their golden child's failures. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the sound of a heavy steel door slamming shut and locking forever. No, I said. What? No bail. No wire. No help. Tell your mother to take deep breaths. And tell your father that if he wants to get you out, maybe he should sell his watch. UB*TCH. You can't do this. We are family. Clause 4, Brad, I said. Separate assets. Separate liabilities. Your jail time is a liability. It's fully yours. I hung up. Then I blocked his number. I walked back into the party room. I wiped my face, put on a smile, and went to Leo. Grandpa and Grandma had an emergency, I told him gently. But guess what? That means there's more cake for us. I hugged him, smelling his strawberry shampoo, feeling his small warmth. I swore to myself that I would burn their world down before I let them disappoint him again. They didn't just reject me anymore, they had rejected my child. That night, after Leo was asleep, I didn't go to bed. I went to my office. I poured a glass of wine, the cheap stuff, just to remind myself where I came from. I opened my laptop. I didn't open the receipts folder. I opened a search engine. I typed in, forensic accountant. Private investigator. Asset recovery. I wasn't just documenting anymore. I was hunting. They wanted a war. They wanted to talk about family only when it suited their bank account. Fine. I was going to show them exactly what the head of the household looks like. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had been saving for a rainy day. Sophia. I said when the voice answered. Sophia was the fiercest divorce and contract attorney in the state. It's Bethany. I need you to look into the Montgomery estate. Everything. I think they're broke and I think they're planning to come after me to fix it. I was wondering when you'd call, Sophia replied. Let's get to work. The snap was over. The execution phase had begun. The report from Vance, the private investigator, arrived 3 days later. It was a PDF file, 40 pages long, attached to an email with the subject line, State of Affairs Subject M. I sat in my glass-walled office, the city skyline gray and rainy behind me, and read the autopsy of the Montgomery Empire. It was worse than I thought. It was a shell game. Richard's real estate company hadn't turned a profit in 6 years. They had been refinancing their commercial properties to pay the mortgage on their personal estate. They were robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Peter was now broke. And Brad? Brad wasn't just unlucky. He had a gambling debt that was staggering. $250,000 owed to offshore sports betting sites. But the real dagger wasn't in the financial report. It was in the social surveillance. Vance had included screenshots of text messages. He had managed to clone a phone from someone in their inner circle. My eyes scanned the texts, and my breath hitched. Sender, Chloe, my best friend. Recipient, Patricia Montgomery. Chloe, she just landed the Boeing contract. Stock is going to jump. She's talking about putting another $2 million into the trust for Leo. You need to move fast if you want to contest the prenup. Patricia, good girl. Keep watching her. Did she say anything about Richard? Chloe, no, she suspects nothing. She thinks I'm coming over for wine tonight. I'll get photos of her home office files if I can. Chloe. My maid of honor. The woman who held my hand when I was crying about Patricia's insults years ago. the godmother to my son. I felt nauseous. I ran to the private bathroom in my office and dry heaved over the sink. The betrayal was visceral. It felt like a physical blow to the gut. Chloe had always been a little envious, a little competitive, but a spy. I washed my face with cold water. I looked at myself in the mirror. My skin was pale, my eyes wide. Pull it together, I whispered. Use it. Chloe was coming over at 7 p.m. I went back to my desk. I opened a Word document. I began to type. I created a fake legal addendum. I titled it, Inheritance Disbursement Plan, Miller Estate. In this fake document, I detailed a fictional inheritance from a distant aunt, another $10 million coming my way, untaxed, to be deposited next month. I printed it out. I marked it confidential in red ink. When Chloe arrived, she was all smiles and fake warmth. She brought a bottle of Riesling. Hey babe. You look tired, she said, hugging me. Her hug felt like a constrictor snake coiling. Just work, I sighed, playing the part of the exhausted, unsuspecting victim. So much paperwork. We drank wine. We talked about nothing. I need to run to the bathroom, I said after an hour. Pour yourself another glass. I left the fake document on the coffee table, face up, just barely covered by a magazine. I went to the bathroom and counted to 60. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was snapping a photo. When I came back, Chloe looked flushed, excited. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah. Just got a text from a guy. Actually, Beth, I hate to run, but he wants to meet up. Go, I said, suppressing a smile. Have fun. She practically ran out the door. She was rushing to send that photo to Patricia. She was delivering the cheese to the trap. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Vance. Vance, they took the bait. Patricia just called her lawyer. They think you're about to double your net worth. They're going to accelerate the timeline. Good, I texted back. I walked to the window. I watched Chloe's car disappear down the winding road. I felt a profound sense of loss. I had lost my family-in-law years ago. Today, I lost my best friend. But in war, you shed dead weight. And I was now lighter, faster, and more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. The next morning, I drove to a part of town the Montgomerys wouldn't be caught dead in. It was an older office park, the kind with faded stucco and a shared receptionist. I was there to see Arthur Thompson. Arthur was the lawyer who drafted the original prenup 7 years ago. He had represented the Montgomery family for 30 years. But according to Vance, they had fired him 2 years ago, and, crucially, refused to pay his final bill of $45,000, claiming incompetence. I walked into his cluttered office. Arthur was in his 60s, rumpled, with coffee stains on his tie. He looked up, surprised. Bethany Miller, he said. Or is it Montgomery now? It's Miller, I said, sitting down uninvited. Legally and financially. I assume you're not here to catch up. I'm here to pay a bill, I said. I slid a check across his desk. It was for $45,000. Plus interest. Arthur stared at the check. Then he looked at me, his eyes narrowing. This isn't your debt. I know. But I hate seeing people get stiffed by entitled narcissists. Arthur picked up the check. His hands were trembling slightly. That money clearly meant a lot to him. What do you want, Bethany? I want to know where the bodies are buried. And I want to know about the loophole. Arthur leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for karma to arrive, and here she was, wearing a trench coat and carrying a checkbook. They treated you like dirt that day, Arthur said softly. I remember. I told Richard the terms were too harsh. He said, she's a gold digger, crush her. He was wrong. I know. Arthur opened a file cabinet behind him. He pulled out a dusty folder. The prenup I wrote is ironclad. But Patricia insisted on a specific clause. Clause 11. The reconciliation clause. What does it say? It says that if the prenup is voided by mutual consent, all assets and liabilities become community property retroactive to the start of the marriage. I paused, processing the legalese. Liabilities. You mean debt? Exactly, Arthur said, tapping the paper. Patricia wanted this in case you came into the marriage with secret debt. She wanted to make sure if they ever decided to forgive you and tear up the contract, they could legally force you to pay your own pre-existing debts with their money if they merged assets. But it works both ways, I realized. It works both ways, Arthur confirmed. If they convince you to void this prenup now, your wealth merges with theirs. But their debt merges with yours. And if I refuse to void it, then they stay drowning in their own mess. But they won't stop at asking, Bethany. They are desperate. They will try to prove you coerced David, or that you're hiding assets, or they will blackmail you. They need your liquidity to stop Brad from going to prison for fraud. Fraud. Brad didn't just gamble. He used investor money from Richard's company. That's a federal crime. I sat back, the magnitude of the weapon in my hand becoming clear. They wanted to void the prenup to get access to my millions. But in doing so, they were essentially asking me to voluntarily take on Brad's criminal debt and their bankruptcy. But I had a better idea. Arthur, I said. I need you to represent me. Not as my lawyer, but as a witness. Can you testify that they specifically requested Clause 11 to punish me? For this check. Arthur waved the paper. I'd testify against the Pope. But for the pleasure of seeing Richard Montgomery's face, when he realizes he played himself. I'd do it for free. I stood up. Keep the money. Consider it a retainer. I'm going to need you at dinner next Friday. Dinner? Yes. The ambush. They're coming to my house to talk. Arthur laughed, a rasping, delightful sound. God help them. The atmosphere in my dining room was thick enough to choke on. I had set the table with the good china, the expensive stuff I bought myself. I laid out a spread of seafood and prime rib. I wanted them to see exactly what success tasted like. Patricia, Richard, and Brad arrived at 7 p.m. sharp. They brought a lawyer I didn't recognize, a slick guy in a shiny suit named Mr. Sterling. Family dinner with legal counsel? David asked, opening the door. He looked confused. I hadn't told David everything yet. I needed him to see it for himself. I needed him to witness the ambush so he could finally cut the cord. Just a precaution, son, Richard said, patting David on the back a little too hard. We have some exciting business to discuss. They sat down. Patricia was practically vibrating with nervous energy. She kept touching her necklace. Brad was sweating, his eyes darting around the room, assessing the value of my paintings, my furniture. He looked like a junkie in a pharmacy. We ate in relative silence. The clinking of silverware sounded like sword strikes. So I said, wiping my mouth. To what do we owe the pleasure? And why is Mr. Sterling here? Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. He opened his briefcase. Mrs. Montgomery, excuse me, Mrs. Miller Montgomery. My clients have been doing some soul searching. Soul searching, I repeated. Did they find anything? Patricia let out a tight, forced laugh. Oh, Bethany. Always so sharp. Look, we've been thinking. It's been 7 years. You've proven yourself. You've been a suitable wife for David. Suitable, I said. Exemplary, Richard corrected quickly. And we think it's time to remove the barriers between us. The prenup. It's an archaic document. It creates distrust. We want to welcome you fully into the fold. Sterling slid a document across the table. This is a dissolution of premarital agreement. It voids the previous contract. It states that from this day forward, all assets of the Montgomery family and the Miller family are pooled into a shared family trust. One big happy pot. David picked up the paper. Mom, Dad, this is really generous. You want to share the estate with us. David still thought the estate was worth millions. He thought they were offering to give us money. Exactly, David. Brad blurted out. We want to share everything. We want to protect you guys. I looked at Brad. Protect us from what? From instability, Brad said. I picked up the document. I pretended to read it. So, I said slowly. If I sign this, I get access to the Montgomery fortune. Yes, Patricia said, her eyes gleaming. And you get access to mine. Well, it's all one pot, dear, Patricia said dismissively. But compared to the family legacy, your little app money is a nice addition, but hardly the main course. The lie was so bold, so breathtaking, I almost admired it. They were standing on the edge of a cliff, trying to convince me to tie my rope to their waist, claiming they could fly. And what about debts? I asked. Does this merge our debts too? Sterling shifted in his seat. Standard language. Assets and liabilities combined. But surely, neither party has significant liabilities. I looked at Brad. He looked away. David, I said, turning to my husband. What do you think? I think it's a nice gesture, Beth, David said softly. They're trying to make amends. They want us to be equal. My heart ached for him. He wanted their approval so badly. He wanted to believe they loved him. Breaking that illusion was going to be the hardest thing I ever had to do. It is a nice gesture, I said. I stood up. I walked to the head of the table. But I have a question, I said. Why now? Why, after 7 years of calling me a gold digger, do you suddenly want to share your gold with me? Because we love you, Patricia said. Or, I said, my voice dropping an octave, is it because Brad is facing 5 to 10 years for wire fraud, and you need $5 million by Monday to pay off the investors he stole from? The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb counting down to 0. Brad dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. Patricia's face went white. Richard froze. What? David whispered. Brad? How? Richard stammered. How do you know that? I reached under the table and pulled out my own folder. The blue folder. I didn't sign your document, Patricia, I said. But I have one for you. This is absurd, Mr. Sterling said, standing up. My clients are not. Sit down, Sterling, I snapped. Unless you want me to report you to the Bar Association for aiding in a fraudulent contract negotiation. You knew they were insolvent when you drafted this, didn't you? Sterling sat down. Fast. Patricia slammed her hand on the table. The veneer of the dignified matriarch shattered completely. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. You snooping little rat, she screamed. Spittle flew from her mouth. How dare you investigate us? After everything we gave you. You gave me nothing. I yelled back, finally letting 7 years of anger surface. You gave me insults. You gave me a bill for dating your son. You gave me a fake wedding. We gave you the name. Patricia shrieked. You are nobody. You are a mechanic's daughter. Without us, you are trash. Mom. David shouted, standing up. He looked horrified. Stop it. Shut up, David. Richard roared. You let this woman neuter you. She controls the money, she controls the house. Are you a man or a pet? I'm the man who pays his own bills, David said, his voice shaking but firm. Unlike you, apparently. Brad jumped up, knocking his chair over. You think you're so smart, Bethany. You think you can just watch us sink. We have leverage. What leverage? I asked calmly. Chloe, Brad sneered. My heart hardened. Go on. We know about your secret inheritance, Brad said triumphantly. We know you're hiding $10 million. If you don't sign this dissolution and bail us out, we're going to sue you for divorce on David's behalf. We'll claim financial infidelity. We'll take half of everything. We'll take custody of Leo because you're an unfit, lying mother. Custody? I repeated. The word hung in the air. We'll bury you in legal fees, Patricia hissed. We have connections. Judges. We will paint you as a mentally unstable hoarder who hid assets from her husband. You will lose your son. David looked at me. Beth? What inheritance? I looked at my husband. The one I invented to catch a rat, I said softly. I turned back to the Montgomerys. I opened the blue folder. You want to talk about leverage? I pulled out a photograph. This is a photo of Brad meeting with a known loan shark last Tuesday. I pulled out another paper. This is the foreclosure notice on your estate that you hid from David. I pulled out a third paper. And this is an affidavit from Arthur Thompson. Remember him? Your old lawyer. He's prepared to testify that the original prenup, the one you forced me to sign, was designed specifically to prevent exactly what you are trying to do now. You wanted separate assets. You got them. And as for Chloe, I said, tossing the fake inheritance document on the table. I planted that information. There is no 10 million. There is only the money I earned. The money you will never, ever touch. Patricia looked at the documents. Her hands started to shake uncontrollably. She looked at Richard, but he was staring at the table, defeated. David, Patricia whimpered, switching tactics instantly. Tears welled up in her eyes. David, please. Your brother will go to jail. They'll kill him in there. Please. Make her sign. She's your wife. She has to listen to you. David looked at his mother. He looked at the tears that had manipulated him his entire life. Then he looked at me. He saw the woman who had built a life for us. The woman who stood by him when they cut him off. David walked over to me. He took my hand. She doesn't have to listen to me, David said, his voice cold and final. She's my partner. And if she says no, then the answer is no. Get out, I said. Bethany. Richard started. Get out. I screamed. Get out of my house. Get away from my son. If I see any of you near Leo again, I will release Brad's fraud files to the FBI myself. You have 10 seconds. The silence was broken only by Brad's heavy breathing. You'll regret this, Patricia whispered. You'll regret starting a war with us. The war is over, Patricia, I said. You just didn't realize you were the casualty. You would think that after being kicked out of my house and exposed as frauds, the Montgomerys would retreat. You would think shame would drive them into the shadows. But you have to understand something about narcissists. When they are cornered, they don't feel shame. They feel rage. And they don't retreat, they attack. 3 days after the dinner from hell, I was in the kitchen making pancakes for Leo. It was a Tuesday morning, raining again. Seattle weather seems to have a sense of dramatic timing. The doorbell rang. I saw a uniformed officer standing there. My stomach dropped. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. Bethany Miller. Yes. You've been served. He handed me a thick envelope. I didn't open it until I was back inside, leaning against the kitchen island, my hands shaking so hard I could barely tear the paper. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a declaration of war. Patricia and Richard were suing for grandparents' rights, claiming that I was an unstable parent alienating the child from his loving extended family. They cited emotional distress. But the kicker was the second filing, a motion to freeze our marital assets pending a review of financial impropriety. They were accusing me of stealing from David. They were projecting their own crimes onto me. They wanted to freeze my accounts so I couldn't pay for a defense, hoping I would settle just to make it stop. David walked into the kitchen, saw the papers, and his face went pale. He read them in silence. "They're trying to take Leo," he whispered. His voice broke. "My mother knows Leo is my life. She's using him as leverage." "They don't want Leo," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "They want the checkbook. Leo is just the hostage." I called Sophia immediately. They pulled the trigger. "I see the filings," Sophia said, the sound of typing clicking furiously in the background. "They hired a shark firm on contingency. They're betting everything on a quick settlement. Bethany, we need to nuke them. No more warning shots." "I'm ready," I said. "Bring in Elena." I hadn't told you about Elena yet. During my deep dive into the receipts, I found a recurring payment in Richard's old bank statements from 5 years ago. Checks written to an E. Vasquez. Then, the payments stopped abruptly 6 months ago. Elena Vasquez was Brad's ex-wife. The one before me. The one they erased from history. I met her in a small diner 2 towns over. She looked tired. She was working 2 shifts as a waitress, raising a daughter on her own. When I walked in, she looked scared. "I can't talk to you," she said, clutching her purse. "I signed an NDA. They said if I talk, they'll sue me for every penny I have." "They don't have any money, Elena," I said, sliding into the booth. "And they stopped paying your settlement 6 months ago, didn't they?" Her eyes widened. "How did you know?" "Because they're broke. And legally, when one party breaches a contract, like stopping payments, the other party is released from their obligations. Your NDA is worthless paper." I watched the realization wash over her. It wasn't just relief, it was the unlocking of 5 years of trauma. "They told me I wasn't good enough," Elena whispered, tears tracking down her cheeks. "Brad, he hit me. Once. And Patricia told me it was my fault for provoking him. They gave me $50,000 to leave quietly and never claim child support. I took it because I was terrified." "You have a child?" I asked gently. "A girl. Maya. She's 6. My heart hammered against my ribs. Brad had a child. Leo had a cousin he didn't know existed. They had abandoned their own flesh and blood to protect their image, and now they were fighting for custody of my son just to get a payout. The cruelty was bottomless." "Elena," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I am going to destroy them. But I need your help. Will you testify? Will I get in trouble?" "No. You're going to get justice. And I promise you, I will make sure Maya gets what she deserves." Back in the present, I looked at David. "We have a deposition on Friday. I have a surprise witness." "Who?" "Someone who proves that your parents don't care about grandchildren. They only care about control." The next few days were a blur of strategy meetings. I didn't sleep. I paced my house, checking the locks, terrified they would try to snatch Leo from school. I hired private security to stand outside his preschool. It cost a fortune, but I didn't care. This is the part nobody tells you about standing up to abusers. It's terrifying. You wonder if you've gone too far. You wonder if you should have just paid them off to make it go away. But then I would look at Leo sleeping in his bed, his little chest rising and falling, and I would remember Patricia's sneer. I remembered Brad's laugh when he demanded bail money. If I paid them, they would never stop. They would drain me dry and then discard us. The only way out was through. On the morning of the deposition, I put on my sharpest suit, a midnight blue blazer that cost more than Brad's car. I looked in the mirror. I didn't see the mechanic's daughter anymore. I saw a CEO. A mother. A warrior. "Let's go," David said. He was wearing the tie I bought him. He looked grim but ready. He was finally ready to bury the parents he thought he had, to protect the family he actually created. We drove to the law firm in silence. The rain had stopped. The sky was a cold, hard gray. It was a perfect day for a funeral. And that's exactly what this was going to be. The funeral of the Montgomery legacy. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and fear. On one side of the long oak table sat the Montgomerys. Patricia looked haggard, her makeup applied a little too heavily to cover the stress lines. Richard stared at the wall. Brad was tapping his foot, a nervous tick that vibrated the entire floor. Their lawyer, Mr. Sterling, sat with a stack of files, looking confident. He thought he was dealing with a scared daughter-in-law. On our side, me, David, Sophia, and Arthur Thompson. "Let's begin," the mediator said. Sterling launched into his opening theatrics. "We are here to discuss the toxic environment Mrs. Miller has created. My clients simply want access to their grandson, and a fair equitable distribution of assets that were promised to them verbally." "Verbally?" Sophia interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Interesting. Because we have written contracts that say otherwise. Contracts signed under duress." Patricia shouted. "She tricked us." I leaned forward. "Patricia, I was 24 and broke. You were the one with the lawyers. Who tricked whom?" Sterling held up a hand. "We are willing to drop the custody suit. In exchange, we want the prenup voided and a settlement of $5 million for consulting services the family provided to Mrs. Miller's company." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was a cold, dry laugh. "Consulting?" I asked. "You mean when you called my business a hobby? Or when you told David to leave me?" "We have witnesses," Sterling threatened. "People who will testify to your instability." "And we have witnesses too," Sophia said. She nodded at the door. The door opened. Elena walked in. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens after a car crash. Brad stopped tapping his foot. His face went gray. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Hello, Brad," Elena said softly. She sat down next to me. This is irrelevant," Sterling stammered, looking at his clients, clearly blindsided. "Who is this?" "This is Elena Vasquez," Sophia said. "Brad's ex-wife. And the mother of his 6-year-old daughter, Maya. The granddaughter you abandoned, Patricia. The one you paid to go away." "That's a lie." Richard roared. "She's a gold digger just like Bethany." "We have the bank records, Richard," I said, sliding the receipts across the table. 5 years of hush money. Payments that stopped 6 months ago. Which voids her NDA. Elena took a breath. "I am prepared to testify under oath that Patricia Montgomery threatened to call CPS on me if I didn't take the money and leave. I am prepared to testify that Brad has never met his daughter because he was too busy spending family money." Sterling looked at his clients. "Is this true?" "It doesn't matter." Patricia screamed. "This is about Bethany. She's distracting you." "I'm not distracting anyone," I said. "I'm establishing a pattern. You don't care about family. You care about money. And speaking of money, I signaled to Arthur. Arthur Thompson cleared his throat. Mr. Sterling, as the attorney who drafted the original prenup, I am here to clarify Clause 11. We know Clause 11, Sterling said dismissively. It merges assets upon dissolution. And liabilities, Arthur added. I have here a forensic accounting of the Montgomery estate. Outstanding mortgages, $4 million. Unsecured loans, $2 million. Gambling debts held by Bradley Montgomery, $250,000. Plus pending lawsuits from 3 investors for wire fraud. I watched Brad shrink into his chair. He looked like a child waiting for the belt. If you void the prenup, I said, locking eyes with Patricia, David and I become liable for half of that debt. That's roughly $3 million of debt you want to dump on us. But your company, Patricia stammered. You have millions. You can cover it. I could, I said. But here is the beauty of the trap you built, Patricia. My company is held in an irrevocable trust. It's not a marital asset. Even if the prenup is voided, you can't touch the principal. You would only get access to our personal checking account. I leaned in closer. Which currently has about $20,000 in it. So if we tear up this contract, you don't get my millions. You just drag us into your bankruptcy. The color drained from Patricia's face completely. She looked at Sterling. Is that true? Sterling was reading the trust documents Sophia had slid over. He closed the folder. He took off his glasses. They have you, Mrs. Montgomery, Sterling said quietly. The trust is bulletproof. If we void the prenup, you are essentially suing your son to pay your debts with money he doesn't have. Checkmate, David whispered. Patricia started to cry. Not fake tears this time. Ugly, desperate, heaving sobs. We're going to lose the house. We're going to lose everything. Bethany, please. Help us. We're family. No, I said. Family doesn't sue for custody of children they don't love. Family doesn't extort. I stood up. Here is my counteroffer. You will drop the lawsuit immediately. You will sign a permanent restraining order staying 500 feet away from me, David, Leo, and Elena. You will admit to the fraud in writing so David is cleared of any association. And if we don't? Richard asked, his voice shaking. Then I walk out of here, and I hand this file, I tap the blue folder, to the district attorney. It contains proof of Brad's wire fraud. He won't just be broke, Richard. He'll be in federal prison by dinner time. Brad let out a whimpering sound. Mom? Dad? Do something. Patricia looked at me. Hate burned in her eyes, but fear burned brighter. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold it. I hope you rot in hell, she whispered. I'm already in your orbit, Patricia, I said cold-heartedly. How much worse could hell be? She signed. Richard signed. Brad signed. I took the papers. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for 7 years. One last thing, I said, stopping at the door. The foreclosure on your house starts Tuesday. I bought the debt from the bank this morning. Their jaws dropped. You own our house. Richard gasped. Technically, my LLC owns it, I corrected. And I'm evicting you. You have 30 days. Leave the keys on the counter. I walked out of that conference room, and for the first time in my life, the air tasted completely sweet. The next 30 days were a spectacle. I didn't go to the house to watch them pack. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me gloat, but the neighbors told me everything. Word spread fast in their elite gated community. The Montgomerys, the pillars of high society, were being evicted. The moving trucks weren't the high-end, white-glove service, they were a budget U-Haul rental that Richard drove himself. But the real fall didn't happen quietly. 2 weeks before their eviction deadline, the other shoe dropped. Despite my offer to withhold the fraud evidence if they signed the agreement, I hadn't promised to protect Brad from his other enemies. The investors he swindled didn't have my patience. I was at home, helping Leo build a Lego tower, when David's phone rang. He listened for a moment, then hung up, his face unreadable. Brad was arrested, he said. The investors? I asked. The FBI. Apparently, one of the guys he scammed was a retired federal judge. They raided the house this morning while Mom and Dad were packing boxes. We turned on the local news. And there it was. The image that would burn itself into the social consciousness of our town forever. Brad Montgomery, the golden child, being led out of the family mansion in handcuffs. He wasn't wearing an Italian suit. He was wearing sweatpants and a dirty t-shirt. He looked small. He looked terrified. And behind him, Patricia was screaming at the cameras, flailing her arms, looking completely unhinged. Richard was sitting on the front steps, his head in his hands, weeping. I should feel sorry for them, David said quietly. They're my family. You can feel sad for the loss, David, I said, rubbing his back. But don't feel guilty for the outcome. They built that house of cards. We just opened a window. David nodded. He called the station, not to bail Brad out, but to get the details. No bail. Flight risk. Brad was going to await trial in a cell. The eviction proceeded on schedule. When my property manager went to inspect the house after they left, the report was appalling. They had stripped the place. They took the light fixtures. They took the copper piping from the basement. They even took the antique doorknobs. It was one last act of petty theft. One last attempt to say, you can't have this. But I didn't care about the doorknobs. I ordered a full renovation. I wanted to scrub every trace of their energy from the walls. I planned to turn the estate into a center for the foundation, a safe house for women escaping financial abuse. The irony was delicious. The house that was used to belittle me would now be used to empower women like me. A few days later, a letter arrived for David. It was from Richard. No apology. Just a request for money. We are staying in a motel. Your mother is not doing well. Send cash. David crumpled the letter and threw it in the fireplace. He watched it burn. We are breaking the cycle, David said. He looked at Leo, who was playing on the rug. Leo is never going to feel like he has to buy our love. He is never going to feel like an investment. That night, I sat on our balcony. The storm had passed. The air was crisp. I opened my laptop and found the receipts folder. I hovered the mouse over the delete button. I didn't need the evidence anymore. I didn't need the recordings of their insults. I didn't need the scans of the prenup. The war was over. The enemy was defeated. Holding on to the anger now would only poison my own peace. I clicked delete. Then I went to the recycle bin and clicked empty. It was gone. The hate, the resentment, the need to prove myself to people who didn't matter, it all vanished with a few pixels. I wasn't the mechanic's daughter or the gold digger anymore. I was just Bethany. And that was more than enough. It's been a year since the fall of the House of Montgomery. Life is quiet. But it's a good kind of quiet. It's the silence of safety. Brad is currently serving a 4-year sentence in a minimum security facility. He calls David sometimes. He sounds different, humbled, maybe. Or maybe just medicated. David takes the calls, but he keeps boundaries. We send him books, but no money. Patricia and Richard are living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of the city. Their social circle abandoned them the moment the money ran out. It turns out, their friends were just as shallow as they were. Patricia works part-time at a department store, spraying perfume on customers who ignore her. I saw her once, from a distance. She looked older. Smaller. She saw me, and for a second, I saw that old flash of arrogance, but it flickered and died. She looked away. She knew she had lost. Elena and her daughter, Maya, come over for dinner every Sunday. Maya and Leo are inseparable. We set up a college fund for Maya, using the money we saved by not having to support Brad. It felt like poetic justice. The money the golden child felt entitled to is now going to the child he abandoned. As for me and David, we renewed our vows last month. No prenup this time. We didn't need a contract to protect us from each other because we had survived the fire together. We trust each other not because of a piece of paper, but because when the world fell apart, he stood by my side. I learned a lot through this hell. I learned that money doesn't buy class, and it certainly doesn't buy character. I learned that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who shows up when you're drowning. And most importantly, I learned the value of standing your ground. They tried to make me feel small because they were afraid of how big I could become. They tried to trap me with a piece of paper, thinking it would keep me in my place. Instead, it forced me to build my own kingdom. If you are out there listening to this and you feel like you are trapped, whether it's by a toxic family, a bad relationship, or a system that tells you you aren't good enough, listen to me, keep your receipts. Know your worth. And never, ever let anyone tell you that you are lucky to be in their presence. You are the prize. Don't wait for them to give you permission to succeed. They never will. Take it. Build your own boat. And when the storm comes, and it will come, you will be the one sailing, while they are the ones looking for a life raft. Thank you for listening to my story. If you made it this far, you are truly special. You understand that justice isn't always swift, but it is always worth fighting for. And if you have a story about a toxic in-law or a moment where you had to stand up for yourself, share it. Let's support each other. Because the strongest armor we have is our shared truth. Take care of yourselves. Don't sign anything without reading it. And always, always bet on yourself. See you in the next video.